pesticide-free. It's a joint conversation with Toxic Taters, the Pesticide Action Network, Corporate Accountability International, and Mamavation. Today we're going to be discussing the impact of industrial agriculture, pesticides, and corporate marketing on the health of rural communities. We are specifically going to pull back the curtain on the iconic McDonald's French fries. Where do the potatoes come from? How are they produced? And why does that matter? Now, during the first half of the webinar, I'll introduce 5 expert panelists, and they'll describe their work. And then we'll open it up to questions from the audience. And at the bottom of your screen, you'll see a Q&A. If you'll click on that and type in your questions, that would be great. There'll also be a chat opportunity on the right-hand side of your screen. First off, we're going to have panelist Amy Mondlock. She's been a successful community organizer and activist for over 25 years, working for social and environmental justice in the food system. And she's been working with Native and non-Native people across Wisconsin, Tennessee, and most recently, Minnesota, where she coordinates the Toxic Tater campaign. Next up will be Lex Horan. He's an organizer with the Pesticide Action Network staff in Minneapolis, where he leads PAN's policy work for the state of Minnesota. He works specifically with rural and Native communities, farmers, and beekeepers to shape agricultural policy to create a just and thriving food system. He, like the rest of us, are most concerned with those who have been harmed by pesticide exposure. Bev St. John is a First Natives Ojibwe. She grew up in a farming community in southern Wisconsin, but she and her family are now longtime residents of the White Earth Indian Reservation in northern Minnesota. Bev was part of the Partners in Policymaking provided by the Governor's Council on Developmental Disabilities and became an advocate for children in the local school system. The health of her community is the catalyst in her work. Next, we have Sriram Madhusudanam. He is the director of Corporate Accountability International's Value the Meal campaign. He works with parents, educators, health professionals, and activists to challenge the fast food industry's predatory marketing to children and its devastating impact on communities across the country. He was recently selected as a 2016 Robert Wood Johnson Foundation Culture of Health Leader to create collaborative solutions that address health inequities. And last but not least, we have Leah Segedi. She is the founder of the Mamavation community, a food activist and social media consultant. She was named 9th top mom blogger in the United States by Sison Media. Welcome to everyone, and I want to start by asking Amy, lead us off. Tell us about the Toxic Tater campaign and how you became involved in it.
Sure, yeah, I'm very excited to be part of this today. Really happy to have everyone here. And to give you a little bit of a picture of who Toxic Taters is and what we're doing, where we're at. First of all, we're sitting here in the offices at the White Earth Indian Reservation, a really incredible place to be. We are in northern Minnesota in very rural areas. We are primarily looking at Becker, Cass, Wadena, Hubbard, and Ottertail and Todd counties, which are all rural counties, anywhere between 3 and 5 hours north of the Twin Cities. So you're looking at areas that really don't have any large population bases. I actually live in one of the largest towns in the area, Detroit Lakes, which has about 8,500 people, just to give folks a sense of what the size of the communities are around this area. Artie Offutt, which is the largest potato grower in the country, has been here since the mid-1960s. They began their planting around Pine Point and around Osage. Pine Point is on the edge of the White Earth Indian Reservation, and Osage is just off the reservation. At that point, when they were growing potatoes, they were growing them year after year after year. It eventually became such a toxic environment that they were forced to move to a 3-year rotation, which meant, a little less damage to the environment there, but it also meant adding damage to a larger area because they didn't want to grow less potatoes, so they started growing them in a larger area. Potatoes are a hugely chemically intensive crop when they're grown in the conventional manner by these huge agribusinesses like RD Offutt. They're putting chemicals in through their center point irrigation systems, which are huge irrigation systems. Here in Minnesota, RDO is using about 13 billion gallons of water a year. So just a ton of water that they're using so that we can have nice, white, even potatoes for those French fries. 50 years ago when they were planting potatoes, they didn't use that kind of irrigation because it was okay to have bumpy potatoes. But now we have to have perfect French fries. So adding a lot more water, getting a lot of chemicals in through those irrigation systems. They're also putting putting chemicals in through ground systems as well. And then thirdly, and probably most visibly to a lot of folks, is that potatoes have pesticides sprayed on them weekly. Every 5 to 10 days, RDO goes over their fields with helicopters. And that was really the big thing that really drew in people into Toxic Taters work, because folks were getting sprayed and getting sick from that spray. We began our work as an organization right around 2006. There were two different groups, White Earth Pesticide Action Network and Minnesotans for Pesticide Awareness. Were both struggling to try to do something about what RDO was doing because they live around the potato fields and were sick of getting sick. They both called on PAN, the Pesticide Action Network, and said, hey, we need some help. And PAN came out and started helping us out and started doing drift catching, citizen air monitoring, to take a look at what was going on, finding the chemicals that were in the air to be able to start addressing those issues. And we're finding a huge amount of chemicals in the air, things that are causing neuromuscular diseases, cancers, developmental disorders in children, a wide variety of different things. So we're looking at a lot of different problems in this area. We saw a great article just this morning in the Star Tribune. I have to give a shout out to the reporter Josephine Marcotti, and really encourage folks to take a look at what she wrote. Really excellent piece looking at what's happening to the Mississippi River because of what's happening here. We're right at the headwaters of the Mississippi. And because of what's going on in this region, there's a lot of deforestation that's been happening because of RDO and because of the changeover from forestry to large-scale agriculture. A lot of intensive water usage, and what's happening with the deforestation and the change to agriculture is that it's taking away some of the filtration systems, and it's causing extensive erosion. So we're seeing a lot of different impacts that are happening to our water systems. So there's a huge amount of different things that are going on.
Thank you, Amy. Let's move on to you next. Tell me about how Pesticide Action Network got involved, what you found, and if you've been working at all with the Departments of Health and Agriculture. I'm assuming that there's an interest in protecting children's health and water in the environment, but tell me your story.
Absolutely. Yeah, thanks, Melinda, and it's good to be here with all of you. Thanks for listening in. My name is Lex, and I work with Pesticide Action Network. I'm based in our office in Minneapolis. And the big picture of PAN's work is we've been around for about 35 years, and our goals are to transition our food system away from highly hazardous pesticides and to reduce corporate control in the food system. And so whenever we get the chance, we try to work directly alongside the communities that are really bearing the brunt of our food system's reliance on pesticides. So of course, all of us can be exposed to pesticides in the food that we eat, or around, when pesticides are used around the home. But we know that there are certain communities that are actually the ones who are kind of bearing the brunt of our food system's reliance on pesticides. And that's family farmers, that's rural communities, as Amy's been talking about. It's Native communities, it's farm workers, it's kids. And so PAN came into this work on the Toxic Taters campaign because we try to work with the frontline communities who are dealing with the most significant impacts. And so as Amy mentioned, we got a call in 2006 from some different community groups who were dealing with the issues from the potato fields in north central Minnesota. And I'm going to share my screen for a moment to give some visuals. Bear with me. Let's go back a few. Great. So here's a photo of one of our longtime Toxic Taters volunteers who's using the air monitor, the drift catcher that Amy mentioned, to monitor the air for pesticides. And Pesticide Action Network worked with folks in the area around the potato fields to test their air between the years 2006 and 2009. And during that time, of all of the samples taken, all of the air samples, about 2/3 came back with pesticide contamination in the air. So that means on 2/3 of the days that community members tested the air for pesticides, pesticides were there. And that really just confirmed what people already knew was true from their personal experiences. So we brought some sound scientific measurements to back up people's personal experiences and their concerns about pesticides. And this is just a bit of a visual of the area that we're talking about. This isn't the whole area around that Amy discussed, all of those counties, but it's a kind of little chunk on Google Maps. And what you'll see is on the right there a bit is the city of Park Rapids, which is one of the largest cities in the area. And all of those small circles that you see on the map are potato fields, or fields where potatoes are sometimes planted. And as you can see, the whole area is surrounded by potato fields. To the left, you'll see I put in a pin at the Pine Point Elementary School. As Amy mentioned, Pine Point is a community on the edge of the White Earth Indian Reservation. And one of the stories that really kind of kicked off the air monitoring that we did and this campaign is that there was a new state-of-the-art elementary school that was built in the Pine Point community, that was built with the utmost concern for the well-being of the young people who went to school there, making sure that it was a high-quality school where everything from the building itself to the cleaning products they use there was going to be safe for children. But when Bob Shimmick, the executive director of the White Earth Land Recovery Project, left the school as it was almost finished, he saw across the street that there was a potato field there, and that pesticides were likely going to be sprayed there very often. And it just became really clear that without tackling these issues of environmental health, without tackling what's happening in the world around us, we can't really be protecting our children's health the way that we need to. And so part of Pan's concern and part of what this issue is, what this campaign is about, is that all kids are exposed to pesticides, but kids who live in rural and agricultural areas get what we call a double dose. They're exposed not just on the food that they eat, but also in their air, in their water, in the soil, and the dirt that they, and in their homes. So I want to touch a bit on Pan's work on children's health and pesticides, because that really ties in with this issue. This is a report that Pesticide Action Network put out earlier this spring, and we put it out in collaboration. We did a few community events around Minnesota, around the potato fields, on this report. It's called Kids on the Front Line: How Pesticides Are Undermining the Health of Rural Children. And it's a state of the science report that looks at research from the past few years, a few dozen studies that look at how pesticides are affecting children's health. And what we found is that there are really two areas where the science is just getting stronger and stronger that pesticides affect kids' health. The first is the link between pesticides and childhood cancer. So when children are exposed to pesticides, their risk for childhood cancer, especially leukemia and brain tumors, increases. That science is clear. The second area is that the link between pesticides and neurodevelopmental changes is also very strong. When kids are exposed to pesticides, they're at increased risk for ADHD, for lowered IQs, for autism spectrum disorders, and so on. And so to this question about what our regulatory agencies are doing, it's really the Minnesota Department of Agriculture that's responsible for regulating pesticides in the state. And so far, MDA has issued some recommendations of what they would like to see potato growers doing around pesticides, but they haven't made any regulatory changes to really reduce the use of the pesticides that are known to harm children and local communities. And so in addition to our work targeting McDonald's and targeting RD Offutt, we're also calling on our state regulatory agencies to restrict the pesticides that we know harm kids' health and community health.
Great, thank you. Let's move next to Bev, because she's going to explain to us what it's like. Let's all try to put ourselves in the shoes of people living in these communities where they are experiencing spray on a regular basis. Bev, tell me what it's like to live in the community and to see harm taking place and to know that you've got pesticides drifting into your children's elementary schools. Tell me about your community and what this means to you.
To begin with, I'd like to thank everybody for joining in. As a First Nations member, I can talk to the fact that we have a history of migration. We came from the east and we were told that we were going to live where the food grew on the water. And that's our sacred monomen, our sacred wild rice. And this is our community. This is what we've been given by Creator. And with the potato fields so close and on ceded land, and I'll spell that, it's C-E-D-E-D, and that's through the treaties. Now, we gave up the right to use the land, but we retain the rights of hunting and gathering on those ceded lands. But now we find ourselves with pesticides. It's poisoning Nodin, the wind. It's poisoning Akin, our land. And it's also poisoning Nibi, our water. And as it poisons all of this, it poisons our sacred monomen as well. Not to mention killing off our four-leggeds, our winged ones, and us as a people. We're losing our children, not only to the cancers, but also the potential. And as you know, our children are our future. We're losing our elders to the cancers. And they are the people that guide us. They're our wisdom. They're our traditional stories, who we are. So we're losing our future, we're losing our past. And because somebody wants, to make a big dollar, there's places where RDO does grow. I believe it's Idaho, it's out west, where they grow without pesticides. But it can be done, and they do it. So they need to take a look at what's really going on and how they're harming not only the environment, but they're harming a whole group of people who were meant to be here. And we're losing everything, really.
Bev, thank you. I think when we talk about food sovereignty, we have to talk about these issues of how our food choices and food marketing affects our history, and moving forward to the future. So thank you so much for sharing that. Hopefully together we can make a difference. Next, I think we should move to Sri Ram, because I think we have a lot of power in terms of the marketing strategies that these companies are using, focusing on children, and yet helping children in one category buy these potatoes, and at the same time, these potatoes are harming children in another community. So Sriram, if you would at this time, tell me a little bit about your organization, Corporate Accountability International, Value the Meal Program, and how you're working to be an interface between the food that's grown and how it's marketed.
Yes, thank you so much, Melinda, and again, thank you to all of those listening and for the powerful testimony from Bev. That's just so moving, and I think a big part of why at Corporate Accountability International and with Value the Meal, we know we need to do this work. I'm going to just quickly share some slides that are on my screen here as I answer your questions there, Melinda. So Corporate Accountability International, we're a nonprofit member-based organization, and just a little bit about our history and our roots. We got our start with the launch of the Nestle boycott in the late 1970s, when Nestle's marketing of baby formula, especially in the global South, was driving infant malnutrition and premature infant death. And since we launched and won that campaign, we've won campaigns really to protect people's lives and the environment from abusive corporate practices. For example, in addition to the photos here from our past campaigns in the late 1990s and early 2000s, we led the grassroots campaigns that successfully retired tobacco marketing icons like Joe Camel and the Marlboro Man, and laid the foundation for the world's first public health and corporate accountability treaty, the Global Tobacco Treaty, that's been ratified by close to 180 countries now. And our work on Value the Meal, where this fits in, we work with tens of thousands of parents, health professionals, and educators to challenge the fast food industry, and in particular, industry leader McDonald's marketing practices that are and have for decades exploited the fundamental vulnerabilities of our children with fast food brand. I mean, you look at everything from Ronald McDonald to toys and Happy Meals, and its advertising tactics. McDonald's has really been driving the marketing of junk food to children for decades, and that has also resulted in really skyrocketing rates of diet-related diseases like type 2 diabetes that year after year we're seeing affect younger and younger children. And, you know, to step into, you know, why we joined this week of action with Toxic Taters, I mean, at the core of it, as this call has grown and grown from parents, health professionals, and educators, and as McDonald's has really come under mounting pressure to change course, we've also seen them increasingly rely on health washing and farm washing tactics to boost images of the brand. But we've also known that in many ways is fundamentally out of step with the experiences of communities on the ground. And so, you know, while McDonald's can launch campaigns like Our Food, Your Questions to kind of make people feel better about the quality of the food that we're eating or that McDonald's is selling, at the core of it, there is a fundamental disconnect, especially in terms of the incredible toll that, you know, the industrial agricultural practices driven and rooted in McDonald's marketing power are having on communities across the country, but particularly in rural communities. And it's critical for this part of the story to really be told. I think the work of the Toxic Taters and Pesticide Action Network is so critical to be able to tell this story. And you know, the Kids on the Frontline report really does show how through the likes of corporate agribusiness marketing and targeting the fundamental vulnerabilities of our children, but also industrial agricultural practices at the core of it, we're seeing rising rates of diseases that are affecting children at younger and younger ages. And so we really did see, even though that these are, and some of our work has been distinct, that these struggles are interrelated, and we really do need to challenge McDonald's to make substantive changes in order to make sure that ultimately we can protect the life of children for generations to come.
Absolutely. Thank you. Leah, let's jump to you now. You've been effectively working with moms on campaigns, but you as a mom yourself have noticed that McDonald's has entered your life. Tell me how it's impacted you and what you've done and how well you've organized moms to be effective change agents.
Well, I wanted to say, first of all, thank you guys for having me, and it's an honor to be sitting here. And I just wanted to say really quick, Bev, what you were saying really touched my heart. You had me tearing up for a second there, so I just wanted to say thank you for your thoughts. McDonald's is a really personal thing for me. I have two things going on at the same time. The first thing I wanted to talk about was about 3 years ago, my son in second grade received a coupon at school for improving academically, I think it was math or something, with a free cheeseburger from McDonald's. And I held that coupon in my hand and I thought to myself, this is a really strange thing to have. We're in a world with an increased amount of childhood obesity where people are calling it an epidemic. And the American Academy of Pediatrics says that marketing to children under the age of 8 is inherently deceptive. And here I have a coupon encouraging my son to eat a cheeseburger. And it just really pissed me off. So, you know, that year was the year I started focusing a little bit more on McDonald's. And I'm really focused on their predatory advances they have for children in grade schools, especially second grade. I mean, come on. And, you know, just they have a track record for unethical business practices. And then you couple that with, you know, trying to silence people when they speak up. You know, so for instance, they're ignoring Bev and Toxic Taters and that community, but they've also been ignoring moms. I went to the shareholders meeting that year that I received that coupon to give the CEO a piece of my mind. Because I wanted to let him know that it's unethical to market to children in a grade school, especially at a time, you know, when obesity and diabetes is just like through the roof with children. And our children now are going to be Generation RX, where they're going to die before we. And this is a serious issue. So I went to give him a piece of my mind, and I actually got to speak with their CEO personally. And I told him a story about my own childhood eating disorder. And what people don't realize is I've had this eating disorder since I was in first, second grade. But when I close my eyes, what I see from that time is Happy Meals equal happiness. And I wanted to be happy as a child. So I carry that around with me. And the core of that, I remember McDonald's. So I told the CEO my story, and he laughed at me. He literally laughed in my face and said, you know, Happy Meals don't cause eating disorders, my dear. But yet the studies that look at marketing to children suggest otherwise. So it's a very personal thing for me, and it's also something that's impacting my family and my children. So, and that's how and a little bit of what we do is, you know, I organize over 10,000 women online. These are all female influencers. You know, I have a conference every year. All of the issues that we talk about have to do with food, wellness, sustainable type of issues. So I'm really honored to be part of this, and thank you guys for having me.
Leah, do you want to share anything about what some effective strategies have been for you personally in the school? You know, I too have seen this encroachment of big food moving into our school system, whether it's a coupon from McDonald's or if it's a coupon to any number of big food industries to reward our children for what should be intrinsic rewards for reading a book or doing well. Have you worked with your PTA at all? Have you worked with your school principals, and have you been effective at getting that kind of marketing out?
I actually been really effective to do was a little bit of homework, right? And look up the, you know, the statistics on marketing to children, fast food marketing to children, obesity, diabetes, putting some quotes together from the American Academy of Pediatrics. I walked into the principal's office and just, you know, gave it to her as best as I could in the most academic, scientific way that I could. And she looked at it and said, I don't disagree. And so they created a policy where they won't have McDonald's or Jack in the Box or any of those other types of, you know, fast food brands sending coupons. So now what they do instead is they do Panera or Chipotle or something else or some local, you know, thing to encourage the children and give them awards. And I that works out so much better. So much better. But it really wasn't as hard as I thought it was going to be. It was just me doing a little bit of preparation and then contacting the principal.
Well, thank you so much for speaking up. You know, the second half of our webinar is really designed for our audience to add questions if they wish. If there are no questions, then I am more than happy to continue to pepper our panel with lots of questions. So let me jump back to Amy. Amy, what do you hope to accomplish with this webinar? We have a good handful of audience participants. What would you like them to do?
Well, there's a couple of things that we are really pushing RDO and McDonald's to do. The big things that we've been calling on RDO and McDonald's as one of their largest buyers to do are, first of all, to tell us what it is that they're putting on those fields. Right now in Minnesota and in most states, there's no law telling them that they have to tell us what chemicals that they're using, which we think is absolutely insane, given that we're breathing them, we're drinking them. Even if you aren't buying those potatoes, even if you're eating the potatoes out of your garden or you're eating organic potatoes, you're still getting those chemicals. And it's only fair that you know what it is that you're getting. So we're pushing them to tell us what it is that's going on to those fields. We want them to cut their use of pesticides. We want them to fund studies on the human and ecological health effects on the communities around the fields. And we want them to farm sustainably everywhere that they farm. So what we're calling on folks to do is a couple of things right now. And I think Lex put together a slide that kind of shows what those pieces of action are that people can do. First of all, speaking up on social media, calling McDonald's on McDonald's to cut the potato pesticides. They made the promise back in 2009 that they were going to cut their pesticide use. They haven't lived up to that promise yet. It's time that they do that. Deliver a letter to the McDonald's store around you. It's quick, it's easy, it shows nationwide support for the communities near the potato fields. And you can get that letter on our website. Call McDonald's at 1-800-244-6227. Tell them no more Toxic Taters. And of course, I was supporting our Toxic Taters work on a day-to-day basis. All of this information is on our website, toxictaters.org. You can also tweet at Toxic Taters using that hashtag, #NotLoveAndDrift, and then go into our Facebook page and liking us on Facebook. Those are all things that you can be constantly doing to be joining into the work. And we're very active here in Minnesota. If you happen to be in the area, we would love to have you with us.
Lex, let's jump to you for a moment. This is a great segue. The Toxic Taters program, working with Pesticide Action Network, wanting to know what is being applied. I'm assuming that the Department of Health might be interested in knowing that. I'm assuming that some legislators might be interested. We're also interested maybe in talking to some extension educators who know what is being applied to these potatoes. The Pesticide Action Network has a great website, What's on My Food. I went there this week. I looked at under frozen potatoes, and I saw the long list of toxic agents that might be applied in the air, getting into our water, getting into our fish, killing our native rice, as Bev pointed out. Tell me a little bit about what the Pesticide Action Network is doing to identify these chemical compounds and help people know about the human health risk.
Sure. Yeah, thanks, Melinda. So the website that you mentioned, this is a resource that PAN has called What's on My Food, which is an online database where you can look up different foods and find out which are the pesticides that are most likely to be found as residue on those different foods. We call it a decoder ring for pesticides on your foods. So it sort of helps you understand, look behind the curtain of what is likely to be on the foods that we're eating. And that can help us kind of trace back through the food chain. What can we understand then about what was applied? And so again, I check out What's on My Food as an online tool, not just for potatoes, but in general to understand which are the foods that we consume that are most likely to be contaminated with pesticides and help get a better understanding of our food system in that way. Because if there's pesticides on the food, that doesn't just mean that we're being exposed as folks who eat. It also means that there are somewhere along the way rural communities who have been exposed, often workers who have been exposed. And so understanding residue is a tool to look at the food system in a bigger way. I think what's important to understand about potatoes is that they are really a pesticide-intensive crop. And so if we think about the whole cycle of a potato crop, in the fall, before a crop is planted the following spring, in the fall, a field is likely to be fumigated, which means that there are gaseous pesticides injected into the soil and then covered over very quickly with tarps. And that is supposed to kill any pests that are in the soil. Now, because those pesticides are gas, it's very common for them to drift. If the tarp rips or while they're being applied, those are pesticides that often drift into neighboring communities. That practice is used on almost all potato fields, and those pesticides can be very nasty, have harmful health effects. Then we follow through to the following spring. There are usually herbicides applied, that's weed killers, early in the spring as potatoes are planted. And then what's unique about potatoes is really the frequent use of fungicides, which are disease-killing pesticides. Those are the products that tend to be applied really frequently during the summer months, as Amy was mentioning, every 5 to 10 days. And when those applications happen, again, many of those pesticides are very drift prone. And we, again, don't know exactly which products are used, but we know which are the most common pesticides used on potatoes. And they include products that are known to be linked with cancer, linked with disruptions to the endocrine system or our hormones, which are, even at very low doses, can really have significant impacts on our health. And pesticides that are linked with changes in brain development and also with birth defects. And so it's certainly cause for concern. And not all of the pesticides that are used will end up as food residue, but there are certainly some that will.
Melinda, I think that maybe as we're talking about the specific chemicals, that it might be a good time to talk a little bit about nitrates, which are a big issue for folks around here, something that really comes up a lot in the conversations here, because folks wind up with nitrates in their wells. And I'm expecting that there's a lot of folks who are on the call today who have heard about nitrates, and some who may be going, hey, we have to have nitrates in our diets. And we do. And there's a certain amount of nitrates that we do wind up eating and that are good for us. However, the amount of nitrates that we have in our water system that we want to have in our bodies is pretty limited. The federal drinking water standard for nitrates is 10 milligrams a liter. And some places around this area, you will see that it's up to about 27. And what that means for us is particularly the dangers for pregnant women and for infants. You'll hear about blue baby syndrome, which is a problem that infants will have that essentially means that it becomes difficult for their blood to carry oxygen. And in some cases, it can lead to death. It's a very problematic issue for pregnant women and for babies. Nitrates can be problematic for people of all ages. There are some studies that show that it may be a link to cancer. Lex would know more about the studies around that. However, I think the bigger thing for us is that the nitrates are a sign that there's something going wrong with your water. Mm-hmm. And it's the easiest way for the water to be tested, to take a look at, are there nitrates there? That's going to show us that there's something happening there, that there might be other pesticides in the water, that there may be other chemicals there that are more difficult, more expensive to be tested for. And a lot of times folks don't realize that nitrates are kind of an indicator for what's happening, and they're not really encouraged to look further. And secondary problem to this is that a lot of folks don't have the resources to be able to address those nitrates in their water. You have really 3 different options once you have nitrates in your well. And again, looking at we're a rural area, folks have private wells. They're not often working off of a city water system. So they either have to get bottled water, they have to have a reverse osmosis system, or they have to dig a new well. It's almost impossible for them to go after RDO and say, hey, you caused this damage. You need to do something about our water. So you wind up with a lot of folks who are drinking nitrates in their water because it's not something that they can see. It's not something that they can smell. It's not something that they can taste. So if they happen to know that they should have tested it, and they happen to do something about it, and they happen to go and further and test what else is there, then they can solve that problem. But there's a whole lot of ifs in that. So it's a huge problem that really needs to be addressed and really need to be able to hold corporate agribusiness accountable. And that's a really big challenge that we have here.
It's true. And I just want to mention with regard to nitrates, I was at a Beyond Pesticide forum this spring, and I learned that nitrates also reduce testosterone levels So it's really interesting to see these interactions between, we look at one chemical individually when it's tested. We don't look at the synergies. So the synergies between the pesticides going on, and as well as adding nitrates into those equations. So these are really critical points that we bring up about the safety of our food and water. But you mentioned corporate accountability, and so we have to go to Sriram right now. How do we hold RDO accountable?
That's a great question. And I would defer also to the expertise of Amy and the Toxic Taters folks on the ground who've been doing exactly this. But, the piece that I would chime in about in terms of the bigger picture system here is there is accountability that's got to go all the way up the supply chain to the biggest purchaser here, which is McDonald's. When we look at the industrial agriculture practices that are happening in rural Minnesota and across the country, increasingly that are happening around the world, and when we look particularly at McDonald's influence over the food chain and the food system, I mean, this is one of the biggest purchasers, the biggest, if not the biggest purchaser of a whole set of staple commodities: potatoes, chicken, beef, lettuce, even apples. And so when we start with corporate accountability, I mean, at the end of the day, we do have to look at the entity that is setting a huge demand throughout the entire market for potatoes that are grown a certain way, that look, taste, and feel a certain way, and that are grown with an inordinate amount of pesticides and agrochemicals that are having a devastating impact on local communities.
Mm-hmm. Some corporations have been held accountable. I know Syngenta has been sued to clean up water that contained atrazine. Has there been any effort to get RDO to test and clean up the water?
Lex, do you want to take that one, or you want me to talk about that a little bit?
Why don't you start and I can chime in?
Yeah, we've been pushing RDO, I think, from a lot of different directions for quite some time, and really trying to limit what they're doing. We've been trying to call on them. We just recently met with them a few weeks ago, asking them for their data on what they're doing better. Because what they've been trying to put out to the public right now is saying we're doing all these environmentally friendly things and not giving us any specifics. And we sat down, met with them, and said, we'd love to be able to tell the public that you're doing better in these areas, but we can't do that until you tell us what specifically you're doing. Tell us where it is that you're greening your work, and tell us how many acres, tell us how that's working out for you. And essentially, they refused to give us that kind of data. And in fact, they told us that they felt like we were being big bullies, which was quite a compliment, I thought, from the largest potato grower in the world telling us that we're big bullies. But we have sat down and met with them, and we have been calling on them and telling them, here's what we need to be able to say you're doing better. This is where it's working. This is where it's not working. This is how we'd like to work together. But we need them to be able to step up and be able to work with us. That's kind of where things are at with that kind of relationship. We hope to be able to go out and tour their fields in the spring. They've told us that may be a possibility. We'll see if that continues to be a possibility.
Have you been in touch with any legislators?
We have. We've worked really closely with a number of legislators. I particularly want to thank Senator John Marty and Representative Gene Wagenius, who have been really great working with us and really helped us with some of the work that we were doing around being able to stop the RDO expansion here in Minnesota. RDO was attempting to add about 27,000 acres and 54 irrigation wells in the past year. We were able to get it down to 500 acres and 5 wells. We were also able to stop the Pineland Sands Land and Water Study, which was essentially RDO's efforts to be able to avoid the public environmental review process and simplify their process to be able to add additional wells. And it took the help of Representative Wojcinius and Senator Marty and other senators and representatives to be able to make that happen. It's really fantastic to have allies like that within the legislature.
Lex, did you want to jump in there and add anything?
I'll just add that I think this is a solution that needs to get tackled from every angle, right? That I think there's a huge role that a corporation like McDonald's can play, as we've heard from a lot of folks today, as the biggest purchaser of potatoes and many other crops and many other food products. They can really shape what the supply chain looks like. And I think, as just to reiterate what we heard earlier, we're not actually asking for something new from McDonald's with this. We're asking for them to follow through on a promise they made in 2009. And I think that's really important to remember, as McDonald's has been making many new sustainability promises in the last couple of years, that first commitment is a very important one, to say cage-free eggs, for example.
Right.
But then to follow through on that in the years to come, we really need to keep up the accountability and the pressure. So of course, that marketplace angle is one of the key pieces that we're talking about today. But at the end of the day, we also really do need regulatory and policy change. We shouldn't just be relying on voluntary measures from growers or marketplace changes. Actually, any pesticides that are really harming local communities or contaminating water of communities downstream shouldn't be allowed on the market, and we should be restricting their use in a way that supports farmers to transition away from them, because without that kind of policy change, we're really not going to get to the root of the problem. And I think Minnesota really has an opportunity to do that with this issue and so many others.
That's exactly right. You know, for those of you who know me, you know that I'm a huge advocate for organic food and farming systems, because it automatically reduces the impact of these toxic chemicals in our food system and our children's lives moving forward. But I think that you make a really good point in terms of, yes, it's a big problem. We have many angles to take. So let me move to Bev and Leah. I think there's a tremendous opportunity for synergy here. Bev, you've got a powerful story that is right on the ground. And Leah, you've got tremendous expertise with using social media. How can we work together to get Bev's story out there, to put a name and a face on the harm, and then using our new social media power to get more parents to say, this method of farming is unacceptable. Now let's go to our marketers and our schools and say, stop targeting kids until you've got a product that's truly safe for everyone. So we'll start with Bev.
We do our action week. We go in the community, we try to get stories, and just getting people aware in our community, what's going from one spot to the other. Our families are transient, and you know, they may have, some of us may have grown up in Pine Point, but now we live in Minneapolis, St. Paul, Washington State. We are a fluid community. So this has to be a bigger discussion than just the White Earth Reservation, because it affects our kids, and our kids are going to many communities. And these communities need to be aware of that. It's RDO, it's McDonald's that are creating the problems for our kids in the schools by the chemicals, rather than constantly hearing that, well, it's your own fault. You guys are, you know, it's the way you live, it's your lifestyle. No, it's the corporation's lifestyle that's causing the problem for us. We're not causing all these problems for ourselves. Right. And that's the thing that everybody needs to hear. Thank you.
Well, and I think too, you know, most of us on this call live in the Mississippi River watershed, but Leah is in California, and the potatoes that her community eat are actually a vote yes or no for what's happening in Minnesota with the growing of those potatoes. So we're all connected, and I think it's really important for us to see that we all have a piece of interest in this broader story. So Leah, help us out here. How can we use social media? How can we better tell Bev's story and expand the great work that Pesticide Action Network is doing, Toxic Taters, and the Corporate Accountability International? How can we work together, be empowered, and make a difference with social media?
Well, right now, what I've noticed is McDonald's is more of a dynamic company right now than a static company. And what I mean by that is they're already moving and making changes, just as like what Lex says. And so that's actually some of the biggest issue is already over. Getting them moving is the hardest part. Once they're moving, you keep pushing, right? So in a sense, dynamic companies are good. So that's good news to start. But again, artificials in their chicken nuggets they just came out with just the other day. They're taking human antibiotics out of their chicken supply completely by, I think it was 2018, which means Tyson Chicken is taking antibiotics out of their chicken, cage-free eggs. These are things that are starting to happening. So when you guys were talking about the chemical production of that is just to have bumpy potatoes or not bumpy potatoes, I think there's a campaign that actually can be made with mothers with that idea. Chemical-free potatoes mean bumpy potatoes. Do you want a bumpy potato or a straight potato? And just giving them that visual and that understanding, chemicals equals this, bumps is natural. Which one do you want? And them literally calling or telling McDonald's in some way, I don't mind a bumpy potato. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, I think that being able to tie those chemicals and that chemical production to exactly what they're eating, and do you mind this over this? And for them to be able to voice their concerns and make the potato production an issue, the whole production of potatoes. And then Bev was saying something about in Idaho, they're not farming in the same way. They're farming far more sustainably. So that's kind of the same argument as, telling McDonald's, why do you have organic milk in England but not here in the US? It's one of those arguments. They should be producing the potatoes the same way. And if they're producing those potatoes in Idaho in a better way than they're producing them in Minnesota, which is also harming this community, that is a really easy argument to make. And like bumps, I would use that kind of visual with bumps and chemicals and being able to ask for a chemical-free potato where it all be the same. And I think that argument is not hard for women to understand and for them to be able to get behind, because the women aren't coming down on McDonald's per se, and some women are comfortable with that and some women are not. What they're saying is they want a chemical-free potato. You know what I'm saying? So I think in drawing those visuals together with getting moms who are the actual consumers, they care about moms. And I know they do, because in social media, they have a whole social media team recruiting moms. And I actually have friends that work for McDonald's. So I know that they really, really care about the mom community, and they care about minority members as well. They work a lot in those areas. So we almost need to just get the moms with the other communities together to kind of say, what's up with the bumps? Seriously. That to me doesn't seem like a very difficult thing to do, to put together in a marketing communication campaign, but it just takes us, connecting all those pieces and creating something that's visual, impactful, memorable, and actionable.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think it's important for us to also recognize that any changes to the food system have largely been driven by the economic bottom line, which is absolutely impacted by consumer demand. So the more of us that can be talking about changing our own behaviors, the more impact that's going to have on their bottom line.
Yeah, and I mean, they've been losing their shirts like crazy in the past 5 years. And, it's funny, like years ago when I first started talking about McDonald's, because I've always been like a weight loss, health type of person ever since I started. People would look at me and be like, why are you beating up on McDonald's? Come on, I love McDonald's. Well, I don't hear that as much anymore. So there has been a big, huge shift in just the vernacular of how people are perceiving that company. And it's gone from just Happy Meals and them having an emotional connection with that brand to seeing it as an adult and saying, wait a minute, You know what I mean? Like what will stop that kind of pulls that pulls the shadows down so that they can see the full picture of everything. And they're losing market share. And you know that they're losing market share because they're making these ridiculous videos, you know, but look behind the scenes, and, you know, you can tell how they're reacting by how much of an impact they're feeling in the bottom line. And they've just gone through in the past 3 years, they've had 2 CEOs. They had Don Thompson when I was at the shareholder meeting, and now they brought in, the CEO is now the guy who was in charge of Europe, which is ironically where they have the organic milk. So
all right, well, let me just interject here if I might, because we just have 5 minutes left. We don't have any questions from our audience as yet. If you want to get one in, do it very quickly. But let me use these last few minutes to just ask each of our panelists once again to give us a closing line and a charge. We're going to start at the top with Amy. We just have a few minutes. Go.
Again, I want to remind everyone to take action this week. Call McDonald's, go to our website, toxictaters.org, and get out there. Go to your local McDonald's, take them a letter, do an action there, be a part of it. We need everybody to be a part. So thank you very much, everyone.
Lex, you're up.
I'll just echo what Amy said. Find a way to join in this week and really find a way to draw the connections between McDonald's, which has a presence in so many of our communities, and the impact in the communities where potatoes are grown, and draw the farm to family connection.
Bev?
Well, I'd just like to remind parents, families, that some of these pesticides are not on the potato, they're in the potato. And you can wash it all you want, but that pesticide is never going to go away. It's in the potato. It's what your kids are eating, and your kids are being affected by them. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing your story. And it was extremely important for us to hear the wider impact of our daily food choices. I'm grateful for that. Shriram, give us a charge.
I'm going to start by echoing just the call to join Toxic Taters Week of Action. I mean, this is first and foremost what this week is about. And I think something for folks to take away is that wherever you are in our society, whether you're a mother, whether you're a health professional, whether you're an educator, or whether you're just someone who really cares about our food, where it comes from, and the impact on communities across the country, our environment, and our health, there's a way for you to take action. If in particular you're seeing that marketing is something that's happening in your schools, or particularly a kind of marketing program that we've seen with McDonald's called Make Teachers Nights, you can join and take action, find tools to challenge these kinds of marketing tactics in your schools, in your communities, and say, you know, our schools are really places that should be commercial free, and that children should not be going and being targeted by one of the world's largest purveyors of junk food in schools. And you can find that online at bit.ly/stopmaketeachersnights. Again, that's bit.ly/stopmaketeachersnights.
Fantastic. And I'm sure we'll have these websites and web links available at toxictaters.org as well. Leah, why don't you give us a charge?
Thanks, Melinda. I just wanted to remind everybody that, you know, again, potatoes are part of the EWG's Dirty Dozen list. And they're an American staple, meat and potatoes. We're eating tons and tons of potatoes every year. If you pull yourself back for a second, attacking this problem at the root with McDonald's really does create a shockwave throughout the industry and changes the industry. If we want our children to be safe from pesticides and potatoes, we take action with McDonald's because they're one of the big guys.
Thank you so much. And I think one of the charges that I would like to, or a message that I'd like to leave everyone with, is that we are not alone in this. And I think it's easy to feel isolated. Maybe we're the only parent with concern. Maybe we're the only one in an isolated rural community. I think what we've seen here with this panel is that we have lots of support, lots of individuals who care. So I want to thank everyone for joining us today on the webinar. The webinar has been taped. I want to thank all of the panelists. I want to thank everyone for inviting me to moderate this incredible discussion and all of the contributions that you've been making thus far. We'll have a screen up to give more information Thank you again, everyone. This is being taped. I encourage you to share it, share all the links. Go forth, do good work, know where your food comes from, and make a difference. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.